There's one thing I like to do on this channel. Some of you may have noticed, but I'd like to repeat things quite often, and that is to really reinforce the notion on you guys that some of these things are quite important. Hence why I talk about them sometimes and repeat them very, very often. Although I know it does annoy some people, but that is the reason why I do it, because it enforces on you guys, hey, this is pretty important. Pay attention at the back of the class. you know. So, what are we talking about today? And one of the notions is austerity. I have often talked about austerity quite a lot, and it is the reason why we are in this mess. If anything, this last week we just had of the schools, you had the prison break. This is 13 years of Tory policy, namely austerity, coming home to roost. 13 years of it. And at the next election, certainly the next election, Labour politicians, Lib Dem politicians, if your opponent is a Tory, you're trying to replace them, then the best thing you can do is lay into them non-stop about the fact that it is austerity and their policies that broke Britain. That this we got to this point because of George Osborne. And that is something at the next election that needs hammering home. Because without that, people will not understand the depth and the level that this has really gone to. Because finally, after years of warning, even right back at the start of this policy, the Tories were warned, if you do these policies, you are going to be left off in a far worse state. It is far better to pay the money to fix the holes in the roof now than to let the water come in. Otherwise, you have far, far bigger problems after, years of those leaks in the roof that cause far bigger problems. And that is what austerity has really done. So we're going to go over two parts of this. First of all, the intro, and then we're going to skip to the part about leveling up, because this sums up Tory austerity and the ideology. And I really do agree with the title of the article. It's not just austerity, it's the ideology. Another thing that I keep on reinforcing with you guys. That's why I keep on calling certain Tories free market fundamentalists, because it's their ideology that is just as bad as their failed policy of austerity that they have continued to double and triple down on. So before we go into this article, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee. Waking up, buy me coffee. There is, of course, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's go jumping over into this, because this is honestly, it's a fantastic article. Definitely go give it a read. It's in The Guardian with the title of How Austerity and Ideology Broke Britain. So I love this because this just sums it up so perfectly. The endless week of crumbling schools, prison cuts, and collapsing council finances has been 13 years in the making. And even loyal Tories now know the game is up. It is now a year since the short, disastrous premiership of Liz Truss. Jeez, it's strange to think it's only a year, but it really has been. Yeah. What a year. What a summer that was. I think whimsically upon those times. But anyway, we continue. So it has now been a year since the short, disastrous premiership of Liz Truss. But when Rishi Sunak entered the House of Commons on Wednesday, the politics at Westminster seemed just as disconnected from reality as during her very chaotic 50-day tenure inside Number 10. Tory backbenchers and ministers greeted Sunak after their long summer break with the customary roars as he took his seat for Prime Minister's questions. And the more difficulty their leader is in these days, the more noise they seem to make because they've got no other option. Rishi was their last chance. He is their last chance to try and turn this disaster around, but he's already had a year. He's already had a year and he's done nothing. You've had this whole summer of attempted resets, policy proposals. Look how good we're doing on this when they are doing absolutely disastrously. He has proposed no new policies. He has done nothing to try and change the current situation because he is such a weak prime minister. He cannot pass anything because if he does, one section of the Tory party will rebel. We had the rumor, of course, about the 40 letters with the 1922 committee that would threatening to try and trigger a leadership contest. It needs about 55, I believe, to trigger a contest, I think, at the current rules, or at least the current mathematics. But you have to ask the question, was that a threat? Is that a genuine threat or not? Now, most of these efforts to deceive to unthrone a prime minister, they're very coordinated. So the fact that someone's come out and said, yeah, there's 40 letters in, no, that's a coordinated effort. They know how many people have put letters in because every single time, and because we've had quite a few in recent times, we've seen how organized these efforts go into. And the people leading these efforts know roughly at the time how many letters are in. So if that is a threat to Rishi Sunak, then you can just see how bad things really are for him. And what I keep on saying to you, just how weak a prime minister Rishi Sunak is. Even though he has this massive majority, he's governing as if he has a majority of 0, or sometimes maybe even less than that. So it continues. Quite why, of course, they were in such good voices must have been a mystery to any objective onlooker. In a week where school pupils have returned to class for the new school year, the government has shamefully published the list of the 147 state schools in England whose buildings were in danger of collapsing, having previously refused to name those affected. Many of those schools are in Tory constituencies, and classrooms, assembly halls, dining rooms, and corridors were cordoned off before the term began, and returning children found themselves shuttered into temporary safe spaces where these could be found. George Osborne, the former Tory Chancellor and architect of austerity, used this to accuse his Labour predecessor of failing to mend the roof while the sun was shining. But after 13 years of cost cutting he initiated, much of the school estate is in danger of total collapse, and former civil servants have said the fault has lied with the politicians who wanted to save money rather than pay for the repairs. And as policy disasters go, it was up there with the worst. And that is the state of play of things. That is just how bad things have been, how bad this week has been. And it's not just, of course, the schools. You've had the prison break recently. That Birmingham, one of the biggest metropolitan councils, not only in the UK, but in all of Europe, going bankrupt. And I was on the the Good Morning Brunch recently, and I discussed this with Max and Phil and Political X, and I said it very easily. All these councils have been forced more and more to skirt the line, and it only takes a little wobble, and they fall off and they go into bankruptcy. And we've seen this for years. And we covered a story right at the start of the year of, is this the year of big council bankruptcies? Because now they've lost access to EU funds. So that's permanently cut off after this year. Or at least those that do have the money left, well, we'll see. But of course, I did say, what about levelling up? Because levelling up, of course, is another big key aspect that the Tories have promised, not just the Northern powerhouse, but levelling up with Boris Johnson. They promised, and yet again have failed to deliver on. So the article continues to talk about the big problems that the Tories are facing and what eventually happens when you come to those voters. And one quote in here is very, very clear, especially they say in regards to the Red Wall, where they go to people's doorsteps and the message is very clear: never again. And especially the doorstep question when it comes to leveling up. In these Red Wall seats, we recently saw, of course, on Conservative Home, with the MP for Rother Valley, cheering at the fact he managed to just hold on to a council seat in South Yorkshire. And it wasn't the most spectacular of wins either, like he was claiming. But they're desperate. And I said they would be getting desperate. And I think that desperation is only going to increase. So get prepared because, oh boy, when it comes to election times, they are going to be desperate. Absolutely desperate. All those Red Wall 2019 intakes, they're going to be desperate. And oh boy, when they lose, I'll tell you now, they're going to be throwing blame around left, right, and center. The copium is going to be glorious. But I did say we were going to talk about leveling up, and leveling up we must talk about because this was one of their big promises that they promised, especially the 2019 intake. Vote for us, and you'll finally not be left behind. We'll level you up, they claimed. And of course, that just hasn't happened. So we'll go back to the article where it talks about this. So another difficulty for the Tories on the doorstep is what to say about levelling up, the post-austerity vision of a more equal country. After the 2019 election, when the Conservatives won dozens of seats from Labour in the north of England and the Midlands, Boris Johnson promised to level up the country in order to repay their faith of the new Tory voters. And after the pandemic, he repackaged the message and talked of building back better. But large parts of the North and the Midlands have seen precisely nothing in the way of levelling up. However, Birmingham City Council is not alone in being on the brink of bankruptcy, and is by no means all the authorities are facing similar difficulties are Labour led. And since 2010, the real terms funding by central government has fallen by more than 40%. So think about that. It always comes back to this. The excuse when you've lost about 40% of your funding from central government is do more with less. And there always comes a breaking point, as you saw with Birmingham City Council. And it also points out not all of those authorities facing difficulties are Labour led. This is a national problem because of these funding cuts and councils, especially, being forced to bear the brunt of austerity, something we have talked constantly about on this channel. So, Bradford's Council Director of Finance, Christopher Kinzella, recently presented a report on the authority's first quarter finance, in which he painted a dire picture for it and many of the others in the region. He said, many councils are experiencing similar pressures across the country as a result of these systemic funding issues, and numerous councils are nearing Section 114 notices, meaning no new expenditure is permitted. This is without precedent and a reflective of a sector in dire need of support. And half an hour's drive of south of Bradford City Hall lies the town of Huddersfield and the headquarters of Kirklees Metropolitan Borough. On Wednesday afternoon, there will be a full meeting of Kirklees Council, and it will not be a comfortable one. Councillor Cathy Scott is the interim leader of the 69-strong authority and said that since the Conservatives entered government in 2010, Kirklees has lost over £1 billion in funding, she says. Our annual budget has been pretty much cut in half, and over £200 million a year lost, while the demand for services has increased significantly. The cuts to local government have been huge, but it isn't just about the amount of funding that they've had to cut nationally. It is that they have redistributed it from the areas that need it to the places that they want to have it. That isn't leveling up. The Tories have leveled down our communities. And that's why I think, especially at the next election, you've got that clip of Rishi Sunak saying exactly that. And one of the things, by the way, to come out of this whole RAC crisis is that Rishi Sunak prioritized the funding of giving money to banks rather than to schools. And something that Labour should absolutely play on come the next general election is Sunak favoured bankers over your school children. That is going to play incredibly well. Just that attack line alone is going to play incredibly well. And I have talked before about the importance of slogans. And especially, there's no truer slogan than that, because if someone questions it, that's where you can go into explaining it. Look, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he could have funded all these schools that needed repairing. He chose not to. Instead, he chose to give money to banks instead. How well do you think that's going to play at the next general election? How well is that going to play amongst many Tory MPs when they get confronted with that? You cared more about bankers than you did about the safety of my child's school. It's a good attack line. It's a fantastic attack line. Feel free to borrow that, guys, if you want to use that. But it already is. It's already out there, and it is something Labour need to hammer home on, and I think they will, very, very much so. Of course, this all comes to the question of when will the next general election be? Well, things haven't improved because Rishi Sunak was brought on to be the big improver. Nothing's improved. Will he? Will they? They've only got another year. If they want to run the clock down to the very last point, then that means there will be a general election in early 2025. That is the last possible moment. So, could we get one in 2024? But the last possible moment is early in 2025. And if they are desperate to hang on to this, when they've had all this come out, do you really think voters are going to forget this? Because they haven't forgotten about COVID. And the people in the north, in the Red Wall, haven't forgotten the promises that have been clearly broken about levelling up. And of course, you've got that perfect clip of Rishi Sunak himself reminding, his conservative voters that, oh, don't worry, we took money from areas like Kirklees to give to you, to the wealthy areas, the ones that need it most. Yeah. How well do you think that's going to play in the Red Wall? So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.